The call came in just as I was pulling out of the Joe train station parking lot, still watching my daughter's train disappear around the bend toward Union Station. I almost didn't answer. My phone was sitting face down on the passenger seat, and I was already thinking about the drive back to Oakville 40 minutes if the QEW cooperated, which it rarely did on a Friday afternoon in November. But I recognized the ringtone I'd assigned to Ted. Ted Kowalski had been the overnight security supervisor at Callaway and Marsh Commercial Properties for 11 years. Quiet man? XOPP. The kind of person who showed up 15 minutes early every shift and never once asked for a holiday bonus, even though I gave him one anyway. I picked up. Mr. Midrena, Brennan. His voice was flat. That particular kind of flat that means someone is working very hard to stay calm. Don't go back to the house yet. Can you pull over somewhere? I was already on Winston Churchill Boulevard. I turned into the Canadian Tire parking lot without thinking and put the car in park. Ted, what's wrong? There's something on the front door camera. From about 20 minutes ago, I was checking the feed remotely. You know I monitor all the Callaway properties, and I had your residential feed added after the break-in on Morrison last year. I saw something. I need you to look at it before you go home. I sat there with the engine running and the heater blowing and a terrible cold moving through my chest that had nothing to do with the November air. Send it to me, I said. He sent 3 clips. In the first one, a black Nissan Pathfinder I didn't recognize pulled up along the curb in front of our house on Lakeshore. 2 men got out. One of them walked around to my truck, my F-250, sitting in the driveway because my wife had taken the Highlander to her sister's that morning, or so she'd said. The man crouched beside the rear wheel well for about 40 seconds, then stood up and walked back to the Pathfinder. In the second clip, the same man was at our front door. He had a key. In the third clip, he came back out carrying a flat manila envelope. He was wearing latex gloves. I sat in that Canadian Tire parking lot for a long time. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a property management company from a 2-person office above a dry cleaner on Kerr Street into something with 42 employees and contracts across Halton and Peel regions. I have sat across the table from difficult men. I have navigated recessions and partnerships that turned sour at a market that tried to swallow me twice. I thought I understood risk. I thought I understood how to read a situation. I had no idea what I was looking at. My name is Graham Brennan, and I want to tell you what happened next because I think about it every single day. Not with bitterness, not anymore, but with something that might be the closest thing to gratitude I've ever felt for a crisis. My daughter's name is Avery. She was 26 that November, finishing her second year of a master's program in environmental science at Dalhousie. She came home twice a year, Christmas and Thanksgiving. That Friday, I had driven her to the Oakville GO station so she could catch the train to Pearson and fly back to Halifax. It was a short visit, only 5 days. But something had been off the entire time. She barely looked at me over dinner. When I tried to talk about her program, about the research she'd been doing on watershed contamination in Cape Breton, she gave me single-sentence answers and looked at her phone. I told myself it was stress. Graduate school stress. I told myself I was imagining things. My wife, I'll call her my wife for now because that's what she still was, had not been home for most of the visit. She was, she said, helping her sister settle a renovation dispute with a contractor in Burlington. She came home late each night and left early. She and Avery barely spoke either, but I had told myself that was an old friction between them. Something I'd always stayed out of. Now I was sitting in a parking lot watching a man use a key to enter my home. I called Ted back. The man with the key, I said. Do you know who he is? A pause. I ran the plate on the Pathfinder. It's registered to a numbered company. I've seen that kind of thing before, Mr. Brennan, in my OPP days. Another pause. You should not go home. And I don't think you should call your wife. That last sentence landed somewhere very specific. Ted, I'm sorry, he said. I've seen enough. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat there until a family with a cart full of cleaning supplies walked past my window and the little girl in the cart waved at me for no reason, the way small children sometimes do, and I waved back. Then I started thinking. I had about $300 in my wallet. I had my laptop bag in the back seat because I'd brought it to show Avery some photos from a property renovation project I was proud of. She used to love looking at before and after photos of buildings ever since she was small. I had a full tank of gas because I'd stopped at the Petro-Canada on the way to the Joe station. I drove to a cash machine on Cornwall Road and took out $500 daily limit. Then I drove to a Holiday Inn Express in Mississauga and paid cash for 2 nights, giving them my real name only because I had no choice. I parked around the back. In the room, I opened my laptop and logged into the security system for our home property separately from the Callaway business feeds. I'd had a 4-camera setup installed 3 years ago after our neighbor's garage was broken into. I rewound the footage from the past 2 weeks. What I found took me 4 hours to get through. I had to stop twice. Once to splash cold water on my face in the bathroom. Once to stand on the small balcony overlooking the Mississauga parking lot and just breathe the cold air for a while. The man with the key had been to our house 6 times in the past 2 weeks. Always between 10:30 and 2 in the afternoon. Always when I was at the office. My wife let him in twice herself. I recognized him by the 3rd visit. He was the kind of recognition that arrives slowly, like fog clearing. I knew his posture. I knew the way he stood with one hand in his jacket pocket. His name was Randall Forsyth. He was my business partner. Randall and I had built Callaway and Marsh together. We weren't equal partners. I held 60%, he held 40%, but we'd worked side by side for 19 years. Our families had had dinner together. His son had been the ring bearer at my wedding. I had been the first call he made when his mother died. I sat in that Holiday Inn room and I pulled up every email I'd accessed remotely in the past 6 months, and I started reading differently, looking for different things. It took me until almost 2 in the morning. Randall had been transferring files, not money, not yet, or not directly. He'd been copying client contracts, property assessments, lease agreements, our entire digital portfolio of management records, slowly, methodically. The kind of thing that looks like ordinary work unless you're looking for it specifically. But the emails to my wife, those were not about work. I won't go into detail about what I read. I'm 63 years old and I have some dignity left. But I will tell you that they had been together for at least 14 months. And I will tell you that the plan, because there was a plan clearly articulated across a chain of emails I was never meant to see, involved Randall using the copied company records to establish a competing firm, repositioning himself with our largest clients before I knew what was happening, and simultaneously initiating a divorce proceeding in which my wife would claim I had hidden marital assets and seek a significant portion of the business. In Ontario, a spouse can claim an equalization of net family property if Randall already had a foothold with the clients and the records. If my wife's lawyers could tie up the business valuation in court for long enough, I would be left with something that might be worth a fraction of what I'd built. That was the plan. What was in the manila envelope the man had carried out of my house, I didn't know yet, but I could guess. I need to tell you something about what that night felt like, because if I skip over it, you'll think I'm a tougher man than I am. I am not a tough man. I am a persistent one, which is different. I sat on the edge of that Holiday Inn bed at 2 in the morning and I thought about 19 years of partnership. I thought about my wife on our wedding day, which was 22 years ago on a late September afternoon in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and how I had believed so completely in that moment that I understood what the rest of my life would look like. I thought about Avery at 10 years old walking through the skeleton of a building I was renovating and asking me how you knew where to put the walls. You put them where the family needs them, I'd told her. I don't know why I remembered that so specifically at 2 in the morning in Mississauga. Then I stopped. I closed the laptop. I lay down on the bed without taking my shoes off, and I stared at the textured ceiling and I made a decision that I have never regretted. I was not going to react. I was going to respond. First thing in the morning, I called a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer. Not yet. I called a friend named Beverly Ashworth who did civil litigation. I'd known her for 20 years. She picked up on the second ring because Beverly has always been an early riser, and she could hear something in my voice. I told her everything in about 8 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her many gifts. "Don't touch anything in the house," she said when I finished. "Don't confront Randall. Don't contact your wife. And get me copies of everything you found last night. Everything. before you do anything else. I spent the morning in the hotel business center printing and organizing. I sent Beverly 3 separate encrypted files. I forwarded the security footage to a personal cloud account I had never connected to any shared device. Then I called Ted Kowalski. "I need to ask you something," I said. "The envelope the man took from my house. Do you have a clear image of it?" "I have a clear image of it. I have a clear image of him carrying it out. Flat manila about legal document size. I need to know if anything else was brought in," I said, "on any of those visits." Ted was quiet for a moment. "I'll go back through the full feed. Give me a couple hours." He called back at noon. "Second visit," he said. 3 weeks ago Tuesday. The man came in carrying a small box, looked like it might be a shoebox. He left without it. It's not visible leaving the premises at any point on the recordings I have. Location on the property? Can't say from the cameras. He went in through the front, out of frame inside. I thought about where you hide something in a house you know well. Randall had been to our home dozens of times over the years. He would know the layout. He would know my habits. I called Beverly back. She arrived at my hotel room 2 hours later with a colleague of hers, a man named Patrick who had spent 20 years with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit and now did private forensic work. Beverly is not a person who wastes time. She told me something I hadn't expected. "If what you've described about the records transfer is accurate," she said, sitting in the small hotel chair with her coat still on, "this crosses into criminal territory. This isn't just a civil matter. Copying and transferring proprietary business records with intent to compete directly is theft of trade secrets under the criminal code. If there's also a coordinated scheme to defraud you through the divorce proceeding, that compounds it." Patrick said very little. He asked to see the emails. He read through them on my laptop for about 30 minutes. When he was done, he looked up and said, "You're going to need to be very careful about what you do next. If you tip them off, they'll move faster." "How long do I have before they're ready to move?" I asked. He looked at Beverly. "Based on the timeline in these emails, they're planning to serve you with separation papers in January. That gives them Christmas to move the last of the records and to brief the clients." He paused. "You have about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I want to tell you that I was calm. I was not particularly calm, but I had something to do which is better than being calm. Beverly filed a preservation order on all digital assets associated with the company, citing the records transfer. Patrick contacted a colleague at the RCMP who handled commercial fraud cases. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call my wife. I went to the office on Monday morning and I said good morning to Randall in the hallway, and we talked for 6 minutes about a parking dispute at one of our Burlington properties, and I went into my office and I sat down at my desk and I did not think about any of it for the next 4 hours because there was work to do, and work has always been the thing that steadies me. But I was watching. I'd worked with an IT contractor over the weekend, someone Beverly trusted, who installed passive monitoring on the company's file server. Every time Randall accessed, copied, or transmitted a file, it was logged. Over the following 2 weeks, the logs filled with timestamps. He was accelerating. He must have sensed something, or perhaps the plan simply had its own momentum now. "We let him keep going," Beverly said, to let him build the record. I had moved into a furnished apartment in Burlington by then. I told Randall and the staff that my wife and I were doing some renovations on the house. I told no one else. Avery called me twice that month. Both times I was cheerful and vague and told her Halifax weather was treating her better than the Halton sleet was treating me. She laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh easily in months, and I held on to that. Ted had done one more thing for me. He had found the shoebox. He'd gone to the house himself. I'd asked him to wait for a day when neither my wife nor Randall's Pathfinder was visible, and done a walkthrough using an access I still legally held. He found it in the crawl space above the garage, in a corner behind the old camping gear. He photographed the exterior, the contents visible inside without disturbing them. He sent me the images. I sent them to Beverly. Beverly sent them to Patrick. Patrick spent a day making calls. The box contained documents, financial documents, financial documents, printed with my signature. A signature I had not placed on those pages. 3 of the documents appeared to be real estate agreements authorizing the transfer of 2 properties I held personally, unconnected to the business, to a numbered company I had never heard of. The 4th was what appeared to be a statutory declaration asserting that I had hidden these properties from my wife during our marriage. Beverly called me that evening. They were going to use these in the divorce proceeding, she said. Claim you had hidden assets. The signatures are forgeries. Can we prove that? A forensic document examiner can. Yes. I exhaled. Outside the Burlington apartment window, the lake had gone the color of slate under the December sky. Beverly, I said, what happens now? Now, she said, we let Patrick's people do what they do. The RCMP executed a search warrant on Randall's home office on the 2nd Thursday of December. A separate team served a preservation order on my wife's lawyer, who had apparently already been retained, and seized the filing on the basis that documents involved in an active fraud investigation could not be entered as evidence in concurrent civil proceedings. I was not present for any of this. Beverly advised me not to be. I was at a Tim Hortons on Lakeshore Road, drinking a large double-double, and reading the Globe and Mail and trying to keep my hands steady. Beverly called at 10:47 in the morning. They have him, she said simply. Randall was charged with theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud over $5,000. My wife was named as a person of interest in connection with the forged documents. Her lawyer dropped her the following week. She retained another one who called Beverly and began talking about cooperation. The following weeks were not clean or easy. Nothing about this kind of thing is clean or easy. There were depositions. There were long days in offices that smelled like recycled air and anxiety. Beverly was there for all of it. Ted Kowalski gave a statement that ran to 11 pages. Patrick's forensic report on the file transfers was 53 pages, and I read every word of it on a Sunday afternoon because I needed to understand what had been done. The forgeries were confirmed. The signature on those 4 documents had been produced using a scan of my real signature. Extracted, Beverly's expert believed, from a PDF of a legitimate agreement I had signed an email to Randall 2 years earlier for a routine transaction. That detail, that he had used a routine email I'd sent him in good faith, stayed with me longer than anything else. The criminal process moved at the pace. Criminal process moved at the pace. Criminal processes move in Ontario, which is not a fast pace, but the civil matter, the business, that moved faster once the fraud evidence was on the table. Randall's 40% stake was subject to a buyout clause in our original partnership agreement that activated upon criminal conviction. He knew it. His lawyers knew it. The negotiated resolution took 4 months, but it concluded. His stake, bought out at assessed value, which was considerably lower now that his record transfer scheme had spooked 2 of our larger clients before we managed to stabilize them. It was not a clean win on the business side, but it was a win. My wife and I were divorced by the following September. The settlement was straightforward once the fraud case removed the forged documents from the equation. She received what she was legally entitled to under an equalization of net family property, calculated honestly, which was not nothing. I am not going to tell you I felt nothing about that, but I also understood that what she received was what the law provides, arrived at honestly, and there is a difference between that and what she had been planning to take. I want to tell you about the last week of January, after the charges had been laid and before the criminal proceedings had moved very far. Avery came home. She hadn't been told anything specific. I had asked Beverly, and I had asked Ted, and I had asked everyone who knew not to say anything to her, because she was a 26-year-old woman in the middle of graduate school 3,000 kilometers away, and there was nothing she could have done. She came in on the train from Pearson. I picked her up at the Oakville GO station, same parking lot as before, and we drove to the Burlington apartment because I was still there, still hadn't gone back to the house. She looked around the furnished apartment with its rented furniture and its one window facing the parking structure, and she sat down on the couch, and she said, "Dad, tell me what happened." So I did. I told her all of it. It took almost 2 hours. She didn't interrupt very much. When I finished, there was a long silence. and I thought about all the dinners where she hadn't looked at me, and all the single-sentence answers about her research. And then she said, very quietly, "She told me you were moving money around, that you had accounts she didn't know about. She told me in October." I sat with that for a moment. "And you believed her?" I asked. "I didn't know what to believe," she said. "I didn't want to. I didn't know how to ask you about it." She looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad. You don't have anything to be sorry about," I said. "You were given information that turned out to be false, by someone you had reason to trust." She cried then, and I put my arm around her, and we sat there in that rented Burlington apartment for a while looking at the parking structure out the window. "I want to know more about the watershed research," I said eventually. She laughed a little, the way she had on the phone. "It's actually really interesting." "I know," I said. "You always liked the complicated problems." She got that from her grandmother, not from me. Her grandmother was a woman who could see a system, any kind, and understand where the weak point was. I'm more of a brick-by-brick kind of person. I build slowly, and I hold on. It has cost me things over the years. It also, in the end, saved me. Randall Forsyth was convicted 14 months later of fraud over $5,000 and theft of trade secrets. He received an 18-month conditional sentence and 2 years of probation, with conditions preventing him from operating in any property management or real estate capacity in Ontario. His lawyer argued for a discharge on the basis of his prior good standing. The judge was not persuaded. Ted Kowalski got a significant raise that January. He didn't make a big thing of it. He never does. Beverly sent me a bottle of 40 Creek whiskey when the Sybil case closed. I put it on the shelf in the new office. I moved the business to a space in Burlington, smaller than the old Oakville location, cleaner. And I look at it sometimes. I am 63 years old. I have rebuilt the client relationships that wavered. I have hired 2 new property managers who don't know any of the history and don't need to. Avery defended her thesis in the spring and took a position with an environmental consulting firm in Toronto, which means she's close enough to come for dinner on a Sunday. She comes most Sundays. I still drive the F-250. It's 6 years old now, and I probably should have traded it in. But I've never been a person who replaces things just because time has passed. There is a moment I think about sometimes, from that first night in the Holiday Inn parking lot when I went out to my truck just to stand in the cold air for a few minutes after reading the emails. I stood there and I looked up, and there were no stars visible over Mississauga, just the orange glow of the city reflected off the clouds, the kind of sky that tells you nothing except that you are in the middle of a lot of people and none of them know what's happening to you right now. I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I thought, I know what the next step is. Those two things can both be true at the same time. I found that it helps to remember that. The next step is always the one in front of you. You don't need to see the whole road. You just need to take the step. That's what I did. Step by step. Through the worst year of my adult life, I kept taking the next one. And here I am,